Macron wants to open debate on European nuclear deterrent. And I looked at this article and it became clear to me that alarm bells are ringing throughout all of the NATO countries. The EU is in panic. This is a five-alarm fire going on within the NATO country, within the NATO alliance. And in large measure, it has to do with the fact that two things. One, that they deceived the people. They lied for so long about what was going on the ground. And now that it's become impossible for them to hide the fact that this war is not going as the public had been led to believe for months, for really years. That's the first cause of the panic. But the second cause of panic is the fact that not only could they lose the war, but elections are coming around in all of these countries, and it's a possibility that you could see a massive political shift across the EU and NATO countries in upcoming elections based on the reality that we were promised that victory was assured. We were told that Russia was losing, and then all of a sudden, and we were told that Ukraine could win. While many people were saying at the beginning that there was no way Ukraine could win the war just because of population differences in size between Russia and Ukraine, but also because of the military imbalance that existed, and that NATO was not prepared, not in a position, not necessarily the desire, but was not in a position to really support Ukraine in the way that Ukraine needed in order to win this war. And so now that it's become apparent really to everyone that things are not going their way, the panic button has been pressed. You see Macron, I mean, he's a bellwether for panic anytime something's going on in the world that doesn't go along the Western plans. Macron reaffirms possibility of sending troops to Ukraine. And so what was once taboo, what was once not possible, now we're seeing more and more and more of these stories, whether it's nuclear deterrent, whether it's sending troops, whether it's the United States talking about sending more troops, advisors. But we know these are troops who are engaged in combat activities, and these are individuals who will be targeted by the Russian military. NATO chief chides members as Ukraine's allies say slow arms deliveries have helped Russia. The reality of this thing is this: panic has set in. They don't know how they're going to pull this one out. They don't know how they're going to be able to convince people that up is down and down is up. They don't know how they're going to be able to try to save face in the global geopolitical framework where they have been the global bullies and they've gotten whatever they wanted, whenever they wanted, through the threat of violence. Now that threat is losing its power. And what happens if it's possible? I mean, they're thinking, what's going to happen if we lose this war? I want to give you three reasons why NATO is panicking over Russia. Three reasons, and it's more than just what's going on the battlefield. That's where I want to start. But I want to move to the geopolitical. What does the loss mean on a global sense, economically? What does it mean for the global south? What does it mean for the future of the world economy? I want to start with the war itself, but then want to broaden this concept of why NATO is truly panicking. Let me just pause and say thank you for watching the program. Thank you. I know you guys could be doing tons of other things during your day, but I appreciate you taking out the time to watch. If you're not subscribed, why don't you subscribe to us? Give us a like, share with a friend so that we can grow the platform. Let's just talk about the war first. Germany launches urgent appeal to bolster Ukraine's starved air defenses against Russia. The reason it's clear to most people that the war is not going the West way is because they have seen an increase in the effectiveness of the Russian Air Force. They've seen an increase in the effectiveness of the bombing campaigns. We saw a bit of it when the drones started to appear. And these Iranian-made, either made or Iranian-designed drones were raining down on Ukraine. And at the time, people talked a lot of trash, say, oh, these drones aren't doing that much damage. Oh, these drones aren't. Well, now it's clear to everyone that the drones were designed not necessarily to do significant damage to the country as much as it was to wear down the air defenses. The air defenses, these Patriot systems, the missiles are awfully expensive. $1 million missiles to shoot down a $30,000 drone. And you saw this just recently in the volley between Iran and Israel, that, hey, you get into something like this and one side is spending 20, 30 million and the other is spending upwards of $1 billion. That's not sustainable. And from what is going on and what we saw there is the United States pressuring Israel, don't go any further because we don't, our production capacity, if you were to get into a full scale air warfare, missile volleys with Iran on a continuous basis, we would not have the ability to supply the missile systems necessary to defend, to help you shoot down. And as a matter of fact, it took not only the United States, it took Britain, it took other allies just to be able to defend Israel for a one-night attack. Now, think of what's going on in Ukraine, where this is happening every single night. Every day we get new reports about the air defense attack, failures. And at first they were just saying cockamamie thing. We shot down 120% of all projectiles coming, and everyone in the world knew that that was ridiculous. But even still, the reality is, even if they could shoot down 100%, 140% of all projectiles, I mean, it started reminding me of Baghdad Bob, just the ridiculous statements that were coming out of the Ukraine administration. But even if they did, the question is, at what cost? And that's the thing that no one's talking about. The cost of this is astronomical. And can the Western allies keep pace in production and keep pace with costs, while they should, and rightfully so, have some concern about the well-being of their citizens? German leader says Europe must keep increasing aid to Ukraine after U.S. approves new military help. It's the cost factor. And the reality is, I don't believe that the European partners of Ukraine are in a position with weak economies, with underinvestment in the military sector. They've used the United States military as the global policeman for years and years and years, as well as going into election cycles. I mean, when you look at UK's political scene is in shambles. The political elite are all on one side of an issue, and the general public is on another side of the issue, and you've got division all over the UK. And so they're in shambles. How can they continue to pump money into what is increasingly seeming to be a losing proposition? And what do the people say as elections come around and they keep seeing billions and billions of dollars being shipped to Ukraine while they are suffering, while many can't heat their homes? You've got pensioners who are, retirees who are having to take up second jobs just to make ends meet. You've got children trying to go to colleges and university and can't afford it because the prices keep going up. How do they continue to send this money and watch the war go poorly? NATO starts deploying troops as Russia races to win. It's clear when it first came out, we saw maybe a year and a half, maybe a little more than that, of reports always trying to, put lipstick on a pig. Now the media has come around to the reality that they're going to lose all credibility, because what people are seeing on their phones, what they're hearing, and the reports that they're getting through social media do not, for a while, for months, did not match up with what they were being told by the mainstream media. And as a result, the media was losing even more credibility. Not that it had that much to begin with, but it was losing even more credibility. Now they've finally given up. They can continue the lie no more. And we see a flood of stories trying to trying to color the picture to make it look good, to put lipstick on a pig. But the reality is, even these stories are stating the obvious that many people said a year ago. U.S. Mull sending more military advisors to Ukraine. Why would the U.S. be sending more military advisors to Ukraine if Ukraine wasn't losing, and losing in a way that is really going to devastate the country? And this is one of the sad parts about the Ukrainian leadership. While they allowed NATO and the EU to dupe them into this, they never calculated the cost in lives. Or maybe they did and just didn't care. I see pictures of people being rounded up and shipped off to the front line, snatched out of their jobs, people who never would qualify for military service in previous times, now in Ukraine, all of a sudden are mission capable and ready to go. And as such, they're being rounded up and shipped off. But what about the human toll? The toll on the families, the toll on the individuals who come back with legs blown off. They had a chance for peace, but were propped up and told that they would be given prime position amongst the Davos crowd if they could just stand up, if the elites could lead the country into a conflict with Ukraine, that everything they wanted, all of their financial dreams and hopes would be realized, that they would be welcomed into the EU, welcome into NATO, and it would just be a prosperous situation. Not realizing, too dumb to realize, or just not caring what it meant for the common man, the person who's not going to be rich, whether Ukraine wins or Russia, the person who's just trying to raise his family, send his kids to school, keep his wife in good clothes, and keep heat on in the house and food in the refrigerator. That average person is getting the raw end of this deal. Politico. U.S. considers deploying extra military advisors. I did a video not too long ago talking about this term advisors. Those of us in the United States realize that when they say advisors, it doesn't always mean advisors, because for the most part, we've got the history of what happened in Vietnam, where 50,000 advisors were sent. And we were told they were advisors, but it became clear that they were in combat roles. They were fighting on the front line. And when Ukraine's front lines begin to collapse because of lack of personnel, when it becomes even more clear that the gig is up, NATO will send troops. I did a video not too long ago about it. Go back and watch that one. NATO will send boots on the ground in Ukraine. If you are in a NATO country, get prepared. Your children, your sons, your daughters will be fighting a hot war in Ukraine, regardless of what the leaders are saying now. And some of them have just come out and said it, but you still have those who have elections coming up here in the fall, early spring, around the NATO countries. And so they're shying away from it. They're alluding to it. They're talking about advisors. They're moving around the edges of it. But the reality is, as the war continues to worsen in Ukraine, if you are serving in military in a NATO country, if you are living in a NATO country, know this: there will be military more. They're already there, but they will continue to increase soldiers from NATO countries fighting, and they will increase the responsibilities. It's not going to be logistics or intelligence. These responsibilities will continue to increase as the war continues to deteriorate. No safety in retreat. This is the sad part about this whole thing for Ukrainian soldiers. No safety in retreat. Ukrainian soldiers say rear defensive lines barely exist amid Russian advances. After the fall of Avdiivka, they began to press. And as they pressed, the hastily made defenses in the rear were then overrun. And so now we're in the next line of hastily made defenses and defensive positions that are not sufficient to hold off the type of advances that the Russians are making, and the type of manpower imbalance, the type of weaponry imbalance that these poor these guys are brave. And if it doesn't bring you to tears to see these guys, many of whom pulled out of university, some of these guys in their 60s, 50s, out here on the battlefield day and night, fighting in trenches, trying to fulfill their obligation to a country and to an administration. The elites that run it don't care one a bit of iota about them, but they're still trying to hold up and really trying to save their lives. And they're running from one position to another, and the position they find themselves in is poorly prepared, and it's kind of like ping pong balls. They're being knocked around all over the battlefield, and what do you get from the West? More war, more weapons, more insufficient support. My thing is this: if you're going to wage war against Russia, NATO should come out, declare war, send troops, and do everything they can to win. But what they're doing is a heinous treatment. It is the most immoral thing that I've seen in recent memory. I mean, we live in a time of immorality amongst the leaders. To just keep trickling in substandard support financially, substandard support militarily, I think they should have chosen peace from the beginning. But because they've gone down this road, they're putting the burden on the back of Joe Blow, out here being shot to pieces, burned alive in trenches. For what? Because their life is not going to be any better whether Russia wins or Ukraine. They're going to go back to their house. They're going to have to pay taxes to a government. They're still going to have to send their kids to school. They're still going to have to pay heating bills. They're still going to have to work a regular job. Their lives are not going to be indifferent. The Davos crowd, if they win in Ukraine, they will be allotted and have access to all the riches of the world. But the people who are on the front line, who are dying and bleeding, their lives are going to be the same. And it's just so cynical what the West, as well as what the United States, is doing to these poor people, having them fight under these conditions. Russia is making daily tactical gains in eastern Ukraine as concerns swirl around Ukrainian military reporting. The daily advances, everyone's saying, this is from CNN, and you know, I have to show this picture. I don't know, you may say I'm being petty, but I watched CNN for a couple months, and then I just finally stopped watching mainstream media altogether. That's part of the reason why this channel exists. And I watch these advisors, these experts, and they are military experts, which is the reason why I can't figure out for the life of me why they were reporting things, and all of the information that was coming out of Ukraine off of the battlefield was different from the reports that they were making nightly on the news. And they would have led you to believe the way in which they structured things. They would have led you to believe that it was inevitable that Ukraine was going to win. They led us to believe that this cockamamie counteroffensive, they led some people to believe, they tried to convince the masses that this cockamamie counteroffensive that they came up with that cost all of these people their lives. And what did they gain? Absolutely nothing. The city of Robotny is back in control by Russia. Ukraine maps show Russian gains amid fears U.S. aid too late. I don't do the map thing because that's not my thing. This is an economics channel, and I do cover the war partially because the war is changing the geopolitics. It's changing the global economy. It's changing the currency system. It's changing the stock markets. It is impacting everything about the global economy, and ultimately these changes will change the way you and I interact with our economic systems, regardless of what country you're in on the planet. This war, this shift that we are seeing from Ukraine, the shift we're seeing from the Israel-Hamas situation, this shift that we're seeing from BRICS and de-dollarization, all of these things, I talk about them, but the reason I talk about them is because they are changing the world in which we live. They're changing how things are going to happen in our lifetime and in our reality. So that's why I have to bring it up. What's happening is a bipolar world is being created. A bipolar world is being structured right before our eyes. And if you leave a chat in the comment, or if you leave a comment in the chat, I will get to it at the end of each section, as well as at the end of the video. I will go through all of the comments that individuals left in the chat just to before we end the program. But I'll look back and forth at the chat to see what comments are there. What happens if Ukraine loses? Well, this is something that should have been asked from the beginning, while everyone was so gung-ho in the West for more proxy war. But now it's become clear that the answers to this question, that this is extreme likelihood, but the answers to this question are something that the West is not prepared really for or prepared to accept, which is the reason why there will be more NATO troops in Ukraine as this thing continues to deteriorate. And if they had asked themselves that question at the beginning, they would have chosen the path of negotiation and peace. But because they failed to do so, now they find themselves with no good answer, no good solution. Putin calls for closer Russia-China cooperation on military satellites and prospective weapons. The reality is that the loss or the continued loss, and to be honest, regardless of what happens here, from this point on, Russia has already achieved a strategic victory. I did a video about that. It doesn't really matter if the thing evolves into a stalemate. If Russia just holds what it has, builds extensive defense networks and additional lines, and sits back from the catbird seat and repels attacks like it did in Robotny, it is already lost. The West has already lost the narrative. They've lost the advantage on the battlefield. They've lost the political capital on the world stage. They've lost the production battle between the global South and the West. They've proven that they've become nothing more than a paper tiger. And as a result, Russia has already achieved a victory, and that victory that Russia has achieved is not so much about the battlefield, but it is about restoring strategic deterrence, creating a bipolar world where the West no longer gets to unilaterally call the shots using military intervention, using economic pressure as a tool to create imbalances that sway the global economy and sway the world events in their favor to the detriment of other countries who simply, in some instances, just want fairness. In some instances, just want respect. In some instances, just want security. But none of these things are ever relevant to the Western leaders. And as such, their primary concern is getting the advantage and keeping it and maximizing it. And we're seeing a bipolar world being created before our very eyes. And it's being created by the actions of the Western countries. It's being created by them, by alienating, by putting military bases around China, putting military installations around Russia, pulling out of the nuclear arms treaty unilaterally with Iran unnecessarily. Iran was never going to not be a Muslim nation. I don't know what if they thought that Iran would, because of the nuclear treaty, no longer be Muslim. Was that thinking? I mean, that would be absurd, that they would no longer have a concern for the Palestinians, that they would no longer have regional allies. So to say that Iran was supporting these countries and these causes was a good reason to pull out of the nuclear treaty was absurd. And now we're seeing the result of it. The Iraq war was absurd. Now we're seeing the result that Iraq is closer to Iran than it is to the U.S. These pressuring and tactics that have been used all over the world has created, it's kind of like a bully. Let me explain it to you like this. I remember when I was younger, there was this bully. He was huge. Guy was huge. He was strong. I mean, I don't know if he had got left back a couple of grades or what, but he could beat up anyone in our grade. And he would do that. He'd beat you up, take your food, beat you up, take your lunch money, beat you up just because he wanted somebody to beat up. Well, once he beat up enough kids, eventually the kids got together at the playground and came up with a plan. And one of the kids picked a fight with him. And he showed up to the fight thinking that everything was going to be the usual. I'm going to go beat him up, take some money, humiliate him, and then go home and laugh about it. But in this instance, all of the people he had beaten up showed up after school And they beat the brakes off this guy. I mean, they beat him seriously. So much so that people began to feel sorry for him. The reality is that's what's happening to the United States. The United States, the West has gone around beating up on people, gone around breaking treaties, breaking deals, using military intervention to promote economic expansion and imperialism. And they beat up on so many countries that now these countries are creating a bloc. A bipolar world is emerging, not out of these countries being so close to each other, but out of necessity. Iran and Russia enter a new level of military cooperation. Moscow is in need of missiles and might be more forthcoming in response to Iran's request for high-tech Russian weaponry. This is a relationship of convenience. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. And so now you've got Russia and Iran sharing information, sharing technology. You've got Russia and China sharing technology. United against America, Russia, Iran military cooperation is a looming threat. Now, but it's amazing. No one asks the question, what's going to happen if we continue to bully these countries? No one in the West asked that question before. Now they're seeing those who have been bullied starting to coalesce, and the panic bells are going off. The alarm is going off. Wait a minute. These guys together can provide a formidable opposition. And it's not about winning. See, I think a lot of times I've read some of the comments that people have made. It's not about winning. It's about a deterrent. It's about saying that we won't lie down and that we have support. You can't harm our economies. You cannot invade us. And that the price to use any of these tools that were previously the bellwether of Western diplomacy, the price of using these tools becomes too high, and ultimately the tools lose their value and their effectiveness. And that's what all of this alliances are about. It's about insulating themselves against sanctions, insulating themselves against military intervention in their spheres of influence. China, Russia, Iran, maritime drills send signal to West. It's clear. A new military alliance, a global South military alliance of all of those who have been mistreated, bullied, taken advantage of, is forming. And the world is going to shift, not only militarily, but it will shift economically. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. But it's clear. U.S. and EU eye North Korea. Now North Korea, Iran military cooperation. So you think of it. You've got China and Russia. Russia and Iran. Iran and North Korea. These pacts and alliances, this grouping of countries, and you got, places in the global South elsewhere that are joining up militarily and using this connection as a way to insulate themselves from the West. U.S. raises concerns about cozying relations between Russia and North Korea. And in the middle of all of this, which is why I say this was a strategic failure, is Russia. They tried their best to isolate, to punish, to chastise, to berate any country that would have diplomatic relationships with Russia, and it failed miserably. You see more of Russia on the world stage than you ever have before. Russia is blossoming in their economics, they're blossoming in their politics globally as a result of what has happened in Ukraine. Not only is it proven that Russia has the military might to stand up to the West, but it's also proving that Russia has the economic insight into how to structure systems to evade Western sanctions. And that looks pretty appealing to places in the global South. And as a result of all of this, a new economic system is forming. And they're panicking. They are panicking. I read a report the other day. I should have put it in the presentation, but a report that Donald Trump is thinking of punishing countries that move away from the use of the dollar. And I thought to myself, you're going to punish countries for not using the dollar as their reserve currency? That's a sign of panic. When you see political officials and candidates for president and serious mainstream, serious high-level politicians come up with these cockamamie schemes, just like the oil cap. When the oil cap came out, everyone with any common sense says this will never work. But of course, when you press the panic button, you start throwing everything against the wall and trying to see what will stick. And that's what we have now. When it comes to the economic infrastructure of the world that has been Western dominated, and they say rules-based order, but it's not rules-based. What it is, it's their attempt to control the system so that they can manipulate the system in instances so that they gain a advantage. And we see that with China and the export bans and the chip bans and the sanctions. We see that now going on. So they say it's rules-based, but it's not. Biden cuts China off for more NVIDIA chips, expands curbs to other countries. Essentially what we see is that the Western economic policy is not pure capitalism and globalism. It's not competition. It's competition when you can win and then changing the rules when you cannot. Look at this situation with the sanctions. Sanctions have become, and I have to give it to Janet Yellen, she warned the administration consistently against the overuse of sanctions. She continuously told them, hey, these sanctions have a limit, and the more you use them, it's almost like the overprescribing of antibiotics. Eventually, it loses its effect. And so we see export bans and sanctions, but we also see as a tool for economics, military pressure being applied to countries who will not comply or go along with these the Western ideal or plan for the global economy. Look at this. This is what the American taxpayers are paying for around the world. This is why the American military might, I think, is being stretched too thin. And we see that with the Israel-Iran volley of missiles. We see that in Ukraine. We see that in China. These other countries focus their resources on their sphere of influence. And so we say, oh, America spends more on military than anyone else. Well, look what they're doing with all of that money. There's so many bases that they have to sustain, so much equipment that they have to send out all over the world. Essentially what you're seeing is I might spend twice as much as another person, but if I have to spread it out over this many facilities and bases and obligations, in actuality, it turns out not to be very much. And that's one of the problems that the West is now seeing. And this is why they're hitting the panic button in Africa. They're hitting the panic button in the Indo-Pacific. They're hitting the panic button in Ukraine. It's because they see, especially the European, see that they don't have the military might because they've not made the investments. Trump, now for his credit, Trump tried to warn them and tell them that they had to increase their military and defense spending. They rebuffed. They chastised him. They mocked him. Now you get to a situation where the United States is stretched thin and the Western partners, the European partners, don't have the might to even defend or fight a war that's in their backyard, that is being fought on countries that are connected in a country that is connected to theirs. That's a sign of how weak they are. And you say, well, what does this have to do with economics? Well, the sanctions, the export bans, the military pressure, all of these are tactics and tools of economic warfare. They're tactics and tools to advance. You know, we hear about exceptionalism in the West. Is it exceptional to cheat at a game? If I play a game of Monopoly with you and I begin to cheat at the game, and when the game doesn't go my way, the dice don't go my way, I reach it down and turn them to the numbers I want, or I say, well, those cards now belong to me. I go in and take it. That's what's been happening in the West. If you don't believe me, this is not a new occurrence. I want you to look at this. I'm not going to read through a whole book, but I did want to give you some excerpts. See, because a lot of times people say, oh, where are you getting this from? There was a General Smedley D. Butler, and he wrote a book, War is a Racket. And he explained, based on his experience, his firsthand knowledge, as a member of the military, his firsthand knowledge as a Marine Corps general, what the military imperialism looks like. And Rolling Stone does an expose on the book. But I say get the book and read it for yourself, or read the article that Rolling Stone does. And I just want to read a few just quick excerpts. They're quick excerpts. I'm not going to read this whole thing. I've told you a little bit about who General Butler is. He was a Marine Corps general. He fought for years. He was very successful. He was well respected, well liked by the entire American establishment until he began to speak out against this imperialism enforced by military might. Smedley Butler knew a coup when he smelled one. He had been involved in many himself. He had overthrown governments and protected friendly client ones around the world on behalf of some of the same U.S. bankers, lawyers, and businessmen apparently now looking for his help. And these lawyers and businessmen were trying to intervene and usurp authority from FDR to stop him from doing the New Deal. And they sought out this former General Butler, to help them in really what was a low-scale coup attempt against FDR. And he refused to do so, even though he did not agree with the policies of the American government. He would not help these bankers because he didn't agree with what they were doing. And ultimately, they were the ones that were pushing the United States to send military units to these third world countries all throughout South America and install these dictators and these despots in order that they could go in and exploit the natural resources. They could cripple the economies and make them dependent on American goods and products. This is what, let's go to the second chapter. Butler knew what most Americans did not and still do not, because they don't read enough and because the media is a propaganda machine. That in all those years, they're talking about the years that he had served, all of the awards and all the places he had been, he and his Marines had destroyed democracies and helped put into power the Hitlers and Mussolinis of Latin America, dictators like the Dominican Republic's Rafael Trujillo and Nicaragua's soon-to-be leader Anastasio Somoza, men who would employ violent repression and their U.S.-created militaries to protect American investments and their own power. He had done so on behalf of moneyed interests like Citibank, J.P. Morgan, and the Wall Street financier Grayson M.P. Murphy. Essentially what he wrote in his book and what he spilled the beans. He let everyone know that, hey, what you're saying about the military, what you think the military is being used for, what you think your tax dollars are being used for, and the lives of these young people are being lost in the defense of America, it's not really defense. This is not really the Department of Defense. This is us using the United States Army, and in particular, in his case, the United States Marine Corps, to go into countries and to topple those countries and to install regimes that will be favorable to the economic interest of a small few. I call them the Davos crowd. These are the elites that control the economies of the world, that control and that manipulate the economic interest in the world. And he looked at it and he said, is that what the American people think that they're sending their young men and young women to sign up for? Do they think that their children are really over here not fighting for America's interests, but fighting for J.P. Morgan's interests, fighting for Citibank's interests? And he spilled the beans, and when he spilled the beans, they ostracized him. But the reality, and we don't get this on the nightly news. We don't get this in the mainstream media. When they report things, they report as if no history has existed, if there's not been any before or after. The reason the global South, the reason countries in Africa and the Sahel region, and we did a video on that, are against or are aligning themselves with this new bipolar world, aligning themselves with this new economic order, is because they themselves have been subject to the imperialism, to the colonialism, to the neo-colonialism, to the exploitation, to the constant meddling in political events, the funding of opposition parties, the supplying of weapons to rebels and terrorists, just because a country said, no, we don't want to give you our natural resources at less than market rate. No, we don't want you to put toxic chemicals and toxic plants. We want to have some rules about who can do what in our country. We want to practice our religion our way. And every time, what has happened? When it couldn't be negotiated, it was turned to sanctions and then pressure tactics. And after that, it was military intervention. Even if it wasn't direct military intervention, it was the use of proxies and the use of terrorist organizations to destabilize the regime, the funding of coups all throughout. And it wasn't just in Latin America, it was in Africa. We ask ourselves, why is Russia so popular in Africa? It's because they have lived through not just what was done, but they have seen what it did to their countries and to their economic prospects and their quality of life over generations. And so now these leaders in these countries are coming together, and the panic button is, as long as it was believed that the West was unbeatable, they could convince countries to go along with them because there was no alternative. It was either do it the West way or suffer the consequences. Well, now they see there's an alternative rising, and that alternative has proven itself on the battlefield. If the Ukraine war had not happened, Russia would have never proven its might on the battlefield. And the world, global, economic, and defense infrastructure that the West had set up would still be unchallenged. The panic button is hitting because the panic alarms are going off because it's clear to the global South that now they have an option. Countries are clamoring to join BRICS group. South Africa says, we see this new alliance, new BRICS member, Iran, calls for digital currency systems this year. You see, the trains are leaving the station and no one is afraid anymore. They're standing up, they're stepping out, they're exploring new alliances, a separate alliance, separate from the Western hegemony. BRICS prepares to launch currency in 2024. We see what's going on in the world. And based upon what's going on, we know that the panic buttons are going off because there's no putting the genie back in the bottle. The real problem to this is no matter what happens now in Ukraine, the sanctions have been overused, and Russia has shown how to break sanctions. And not only that, they're helping to create new economic systems. Militarily, Russia has proven that their equipment can stand up to Nato. So if you're an ally, Russia's military exports, when this war is over, are going to soar unbelievably, based on the fact that their equipment has shown to be able to stand up to the best of what NATO has to offer. So now that's gone. You're seeing, you cannot put the genie back in the bottle. The production weaknesses of the Europeans and really their dependence on the United States is clear to the entire world. That genie cannot be put back in the bottle. This is why the panic buttons, and you got Macron, who's, I don't know if he's just the most nervous leader. He's a panicker. He's a worrier. This guy stays up, coming up with crazy schemes for every worry that he has. And he's talking about nuclear arms race. Well, nuclear arms race is not going to solve the problem of a shifting economic system, a shifting military alliances. The nuclear arms race is not going to solve any of the problems. The loss of France influence in the Sahel. Nuclear weapons won't solve the problems. They're throwing anything against the wall now. Sanctioning countries that pull away from the dollar is not really a solution, because the reality is if they're not using the dollar, they're not using the payment system, what good are the sanctions going to be? You can't put the genie back in the bottle. And that's the problem why panic bells are going off all throughout NATO and EU. We're living through the establishment of new global power centers. And what it will mean for the global economy, we will soon find out, because this is happening not in the distant future, but it's happening real time, and we're living through it, and we're observing it and seeing it. Before I sign off for today, I want to take a moment and look through anything in the chat. Okay, thank you for that, T.S. Chong, for an interesting comment. I appreciate it. And if you guys leave chat responses for me going forward, I'll definitely chime in subsequent videos and respond to those chats. There will be a member live stream where I just talk to the members, and I'm going to schedule that for once a week in the upcoming weeks. So that'll be another opportunity for dialogue and interaction during our live streams and during our other broadcasts. As always, I like to say, why swim against the current when you can ride the wave? Don't play the victim, play the game.
The world throws a lot our way financially these days. From war and conflict shaping global markets to local news headlines impacting your grocery bill, it can feel like there's no escaping the constant financial juggling act. But here's the secret weapon you might not know you have: knowledge. With the right understanding of how these complex economic forces work, you can navigate the uncertainties and make informed decisions that benefit your wallet. Unlock your financial power. Like this video to stay in the loop about the latest financial insights. Follow our channel for even deeper dives into money matters. Share this program with someone who could benefit from building their financial future. Remember, knowledge is power. Let's build a stronger financial future together.